So, hello everybody. I'm here one more time with Ken Cloke, and we were just talking in the first segment about conflict resolution, and we are now at the point in the discussion where I need to ask you, Ken, about mediation. And this channel is called Neutrality Studies because that's what it looks at. It's like the role of neutrals, and I understand this mostly in a international relations sense, where countries stay out of war and out of conflict, and what that does to a conflict constellation, because I perceive them as still part of the constellation, although not part of the conflict. And I believe that that's often the role that a mediator has to take. And within international law, and the history of neutrality, a very important word, a very important concept is impartiality, not be partial. And I believe that you're the person who championed the idea of omnipartiality in the context of mediation. Could you explain to me, what omnipartiality is, how it's different from impartiality, and how it helps in conflict resolution?
Yes. Thank you for that question. And it's one that would take a great deal of time to explore fully. But let's start this way. It is common for mediators to describe themselves or to be described by others as neutral. But what people generally mean by that is that the mediator is not beholden to either side, doesn't have a stake in the outcome or stand to benefit from the result, isn't biased either for or against one side or the other, doesn't have family relations with one person or the other person. But if we probe a little bit deeper, we discover that what people really mean by neutrality is that there is an absence of bias against them. Now, bias against the other side isn't so problematic, and bias in favor of them isn't at all problematic, because that just means it just validates the idea that I'm right. And so there's no problem with your being biased in favor of me. But the difficulty comes when we are neutral in situations where neutrality has a hidden meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So you possibly know the famous statement by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, that if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. He also said in another quote that I like very much, if an elephant is standing on the tail of a mouse, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. So what neutrality needs to be examined. So the first thing we need to say is that neutrality is a step forward from absolutist monarchies, dictatorships, autocracies. These are openly, unabashedly biased in favor of the powers that be. If you are a judge in a dictatorship or an autocracy and you are not biased in favor of the powers that be, you're going to be eliminated and replaced by someone who is. That's just the way that the system operates. So neutrality is not an issue in what in conflict resolution we call power-based institutions and systems. And that includes couples, families, workplaces. And in governments, in religions, in civil societies, it's regarded as disloyalty, as heresy in religion, as treason. Neutrality is also not an issue in interest-based processes such as dialogue, facilitation, mediation, restorative justice. And I'd like to explain a little bit why. But first, let's go back and say that neutrality is an issue really only in rights-based institutions like law courts, where it is widely considered to be a condition for any just outcome. Why is this? Well, I think that the reason is because rights are limitations on the exercise of power. So they operate in a context of inequality and unequal power, unequal wealth, unequal status, and a context in which these rights are vulnerable to the ceaseless efforts of people who have power to manipulate systems in their favor. So um, the um, uh, the question then becomes, how do we handle um, this dilemma? And I'll just give you my personal experience. I spent many years as a judge, and many decades I still work as an arbitrator, which is a kind of informal judge. And when I am an arbitrator or a judge, I can feel the difference between inside of me as opposed to being a mediator. I'm equally distant from both sides. I'm personally withdrawn. I am logical. I am emotionally unavailable, affectless. I'm on nobody's side until the moment of decision. And in the moment of decision, I'm required to choose one side over the other. And because I'm required to make that choice, I have to be neutral, meaning on nobody's side at all. But as
Impartial.
huh?
Impartial.
Impartial, exactly right. Unbiased, impartial. In mediation, however, I am able to do all of these things because I have no power to decide. I can be personally present. I can be connected to both sides. I can appreciate what they're really going through. I can be emotionally available. Um, and here's where the idea comes in. I can be partial, omnipartial, which means partial to everyone. But in order to be able to do that, what I have to be able to do is to recognize the difference, on the one hand, between um, bias or partiality towards one and bias or partiality towards both, equally biased towards both. But the second thing I have to do is go back to that statement from Roger Fisher and William Ury in Getting to Yes. Separate the person from the problem. Be soft on the person and hard on the problem. Meaning, being on both people's side doesn't mean I agree with them. It doesn't mean that what they're suggesting is true. It means that I am going to search for the human being and never lose sight of that human being in everything that I do. And I will make that human being central, not what they're advocating, not what their position is, but this gives me access to their underlying interests. It allows me to enter their emotional state and work from the inside out, from a place of fear or anger to a place of recognition of what that fear or anger is about. So, just with anger as an illustration, because everybody in conflict is angry, I know from conflict resolution work, which I've done for 4 decades now, that I'll put it quite simply, nobody gets angry over things they don't care about. Therefore, all anger is grounded in caring. Therefore, we can have two different conversations. What are you mad about? And what do you care about? Guess which one is going to be most successful? It's going to be the one about caring. So, in any zero sum contest, like litigation, like voting, counting ballots, neutrality is essential to avoid tipping the scales unfairly to one side or the other. But even here, absolute neutrality is impossible simply because everybody is born male or female, white or black, rich or poor, shades in between, Catholic, Protestant, whatever it may happen to be. And if you have a white, male, rich uh, Protestant making a decision involving a black, poor, female Catholic, there is no way that you can really understand what is going on with that person. So, at a very subtle level, um, uh, we say that what neutrality means is that you're not judging someone who's part of your family, but aren't all men family to one another on some level? All women, all Catholics, all Protestants, all rich, all poor. They share a set of cultural assumptions. And as a judge, I can tell you it is really difficult to set those aside. But if you have a um, non zero sum process, then what happens is you are freed to become whoever it is that you are. And um, you avoid what neutrality is trying to avoid, which is biased for one side, not by canceling the idea of bias, which is more difficult, but by becoming equally biased for everyone.
Mhm. I find that hugely fascinating, because this honestly, like in the whole like neutrality literature and international relations literature, this approach coming from conflict and coming from conflict analysis is really really rare. So what you're saying is like is laying out perfectly the fundaments of the philosophical and problem that underlies the political one. And one of the issues that I also keep stressing is that in a political context, when you have powerful players, and that's like multidimensional players, right, who are not single individuals, but who are where you have the ambassador and you have the president and the vice president and so on, and then parliament, where it's really difficult to pinpoint who takes the decision. And within that context as well, one of the issues of neutrality is that political neutrality in the bigger frame is never outcome neutral. One of both parties usually has to win more of the neutral remaining neutral, and that's usually the weaker party. The weaker party has to win more, and the stronger party would win more if they took sides, right? If you could push them. And I would be interested to hear if you have thoughts about how omni-partiality can influence this power dynamic among the actors.
Excellent question and really wonderful observation. I think you're quite right, absolutely right about how the present system works. I've written another book, which I don't know whether you have seen it, possibly not. I'd be happy to send you a digital copy if you like. It's called Politics, Dialogue, and the Evolution of Democracy. And it's that last piece, the evolution of democracy, from essentially a power based sort of showcase where you pretend to be democratic, but you really aren't, to a place of um, representative democracy, parliamentary democracy, where you represent a party, a faction, and now these factions have to figure out how to get along with one another. But I can tell you that if you take those people and you put them into a small group, individual people, 4 or 5, 6 people in a small group, and you ask them the right questions, they will leave all of that behind. There are, for example, I went with Mediators Beyond Borders. I helped to organize dialogues in Athens between Greek citizens and immigrants. And we worked with Greek mediators. Oops, sorry, hold on one second. We worked with Greek mediators. Sorry. Okay.
You're also on a Mac.
Yes. We worked with Greek mediators to help them figure out how to conduct these dialogues. Here are the 2 opening questions. And in present are people who are heads of organizations that have a stake in these outcomes. Question 1: Have you personally, in your life, in a family or a neighborhood or a school or a workplace, ever been the new one and everybody else has been around for a while? What happened? How did it feel? How were you treated? Question two, have you ever in your life, in a family or school or neighborhood or workplace, been the one who's been there for a while and now all these new people are coming in and changing everything? What did that feel like? How were you treated? What can you tell us about what happened? And we aren't talking about immigration yet, but everybody has begun to recognize that they could understand what it would feel like to be the new one and what it would feel like to be around for a while and have everything changing. And then we can start to work on it. But it's not just that simple. We then have to tackle the actual problems. Not you are the problem, but what are the problems that both sides recognize are legitimate, that get in the way of being able to work together to solve them? And what recommendations do we have to make together by consensus to the powers that be? Um, Here's another example. I facilitated a number of collective bargaining sessions between labor and management. And in one of them, I entered the room, there was a very large table, about 25 people on both sides of the table, labor on one side, management on the other side. So before I began, I went to a flip chart at the center of the room, at the head of the room, and I drew the table. Long table, X's on one side, zeros on the other side. And then I turned to them and I said, what is going to happen predictably and inevitably to any conversation that takes place around a table like this? They all know. They all knew. And so they said, and so I drew a line down the center and, I diagrammed the whole thing. And then I said, is this the kind of conversation you want to have with each other? They said, no. Great. Pick up your chairs and go to a place in the room and sit next to the person you most need and want to talk to. And now everything changed just in seconds. And it can happen that quickly. So the difficulty is we have to switch to a higher order of democracy, an interest-based democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one in which it's possible for people to have parties and have factions. But what we really want to do is we want to have conversations with one another that are by asking questions that can't be answered by the faction or the party.
And I'm speaking to you from Switzerland, where we have a direct democratic system, and what
Yes,
that does, and there's one thing that does it, and that's the referendum, the possibility to have legally binding referendums. What this creates is that in Parliament, the factions constantly have to remix along topic lines, and they have to remix all the time. So that actually creates a situation where in Switzerland you have no opposition. It doesn't make sense to speak of an opposition because each party, each of the 5, 6 parties, is constantly in a power sharing situation. Just
exactly.
by changing the order of the system, yeah.
Yes,
In your
exactly.
words,
Here's a last example I'll give you.
yeah.
Um, the um, with you, the people who are watching or listening in on your podcast right now, there are 3 orders of questions that I can ask everyone on this call. Order of question 1: who is the oldest person on this call? Who's the tallest? Who lives the closest to downtown Paris? Who lives the furthest away? And notice there's a single correct answer for everyone. Order of question 2: how old are you? How tall are you? Where do you live? And now there's a single correct answer for each person. Order of question number 3: what issues are you facing at whatever age you are at? What does your height mean to you? What do you love about where you live? What do you not love about where you live? And notice with each of those, we have shifted kind of from power to rights to interests, but really from questions that can be answered within the framework of some organizational system or structure or some set of, kind of abstract criteria, and now into something that's much more interesting. Isn't it much more interesting to find out what issues you're facing at whatever age you're at? And so that's the idea. And that's something that all of us can do and learn how to do. And when we do it on a political level and connect it to consensus based problem solving, then we've got something really powerful.
That is a wonderful way to end to as a final word. And uh, Ken, I will need many more hours to pick your brain in more detail, and I hope we will have the chance to talk again because I do think you're one of the people who gained insight into how to get out of messes, not just how to analyze the mess, but also how to reorder it. Because what you're suggesting is reframing stuff in order to make it better. Ken, thank you very much for taking the time, and I will end it here.
Thank you, Pascal. I really appreciate it.